will go over some housekeeping. We are not expecting a fire alarm test, so if the fire alarm does go off, please leave the building by going back down the stairs and out the back door. Council staff will direct you to the meeting point at the running track. There are toilets available if you go out the chamber into the landing at the top of the stairs. The male toilets are situated to the right of the elevator, and female toilets are through the single door to the left of the elevator towards the cafeteria. Can I remind you that the meeting is being recorded and the recording will be made available on the Council's website following the meeting. No other form of filming, audio recording or photographs are permitted during the meeting. Can I ask that all members of the board that are joining on Teams please keep their camera on at all times for the duration of the meeting. So moving on to item 1 on today's agenda, that is the minute of the meeting of the 30th of September this year, and that's for your approval. Do members agree? Item 2 is declaration of interest. Members are asked to declare any interest they may have in any items of the agenda. It would be helpful if members explained why they are declaring an interest in the item concerned. I would remind members that before participating in any planning decision, you need to consider if you have preempted the decision-making process by indicating support or opposition for the application in advance of the meeting, or by lobbying other members for a particular outcome. Any motion or amendment in relation to a planning application must be based solely on planning reasons. Councillor Mackenzie.
I'm the chairperson of North Community Council, but I haven't taken any decisions and I've excluded myself from all correspondence. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Councillor Mackenzie. Regarding planning procedure, I would remind members that before participating in any planning decision, you need to consider if you have preempted the decision-making process by indicating support or opposition for the application in advance of the meeting, or by lobbying other members for a particular outcome. Any motion or amendment in relation to a planning application must be based solely on planning reasons. If a member moves an amendment, I will invite him or her to clearly articulate the amendment and the planning reasons upon which it is based. Item 3 on the agenda is the predetermination hearing protocol, which has been circulated to your laptops, and that's for noting. Happy with that? Item 4, today the board is meeting to conduct a predetermination hearing and thereafter make a recommendation to full council, which meets on the 18th, that's a week's time, in respect of planning application in principle number 25-00061 for the proposed construction and operation of a strategic electricity transmission hub consisting of a 400 kilovolt AC substation, an HVDC converter station, and the associated undertaking of earthworks, the formation of platforms, landscaping, means of access, means of enclosure, site drainage, temporary construction compounds, peatland reinstatement and improvement, and other associated operations, national development at Arnish, Isle of Lewis. Now, predetermination hearings shall be convened by the board following completion of all prior statutory process to the satisfaction of the Chief Executive or his representative, pursuant to Section 38A of the Town and Country Planning Scotland Act 1997 and Regulation 27 of the Town and Country Planning Development Management Procedure Scotland Regulations 2013. A predetermination hearing shall be held in accordance with the previously circulated predetermination protocol. So with that, we will now commence the hearing, referring to the protocol. And firstly, can I ask Morag Ferguson, who's the Council's Planning Manager, to present the report to the board.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Good morning, participants. If we could move on to the first slide, please, of the presentation. So, The presentation format is just set out below. It comprises of 22 slides. These cover the location and the indicative site plan. There is a model image of the likely form and layout of the buildings on the proposed platforms. There are a series of slides on the site development proposals for the Arnish Moor part of the site. There is a slide to give context to some cumulative viewpoint visualizations. There are then a series of slides on the viewpoints, on a selection of viewpoints and visualizations. That's then followed by two short clips of drone footage, one on the Arnish Moor part of the site and the other on the Creed North part of the site. And the presentation concludes in just a summary and presentation of the Office of Recommendation. So if I just move on to the first slide. So the slide sets out the location of the proposed site in the context of the wider geographical area. So the inset shows the Isle of Lewis, Stornoway, and the main slide shows the location of the site. So starting in the bottom left-hand corner, the site is dissected by the Lochs Road coming in from the south. The southern extremity is just north of the entrance to the Creed Enterprise Park. It includes an area out to the Arnish Road. The area to the west is the Creed North part of the site. You can see the Pentland Road out to the west and the town of Stornoway on the right of the slide, with the castle grounds shaded in green between that. This is a site layout plan. It's indicative given that the application is planning permission in principle, but again provides detail on the proposals. First of all, on the Arnish Moor part of the site, which is on the eastern side of the A859. This is the part of the site that it is proposed to be developed for the main infrastructure. The part of the site on the western side of the road, the Creed North part of the site, is indicated as being intended for peat restoration works, and therefore which would be contained to a fairly limited area. This slide provides a 3D model of what the likely layout and form of the buildings on the platforms could be. The applicant has commissioned a colour study to identify the colour palette that would work best to mitigate visual effects of the proposal when viewed from different directions. The site provides the layout as submitted. It will be subject to further refinement under matters specified by conditions, assuming the application is approved. But just by way of context, the site would have two construction accesses, which would also be maintained in the longer run. So the first access would come off the Lochs Road, shown on the left-hand side of the slide, coming in directly opposite the entrance to Lochside Arena. That's indicated in orange, and a secondary access coming in off the Arnish Road. The AC platform, where the 400 kV substation and smaller substations would be constructed, is shown in yellow. High voltage direct current station would be on the platform that's indicated in green. And then during construction works, there would be two construction compounds for laydown. These are indicated in brown. The area to the east would be subject to landscaping proposals in order to mitigate the visual effects of the buildings from that direction as part of the final site restoration works. And the areas that are indicated in lilac are those areas that are indicated as potentially being used as borrow pits to win the rock that would be necessary to form the on-site accesses and construction platforms. The slide shows the extent of the land that would be cleared in order to accommodate the development. So this is where soil stripping would occur, and it corresponds to what is shown on the previous, what has been detailed on the previous slide. This slide shows what is proposed as would be the permanent surface water drainage layout. The two existing water courses to the north and south would be retained. These would be subject to a 10-metre buffer during construction and post development. There is a drain that runs midway through the site, which would be closed as part of the development works. So now moving on to the specifics of the platform areas and the maximum building envelope for each of the platforms. So the converter station platforms that indicated in green, it's that would be closer to the Arnish Road on the east of the site. The buildings on that would be rise to a maximum of 27.5 metres in height. The AC platform, which would be closer to the Lochs Road, would have a maximum building footprint of 260 by 250 for the platform, and the buildings on that platform would rise to a maximum height of 20 metres. The slide is taken from the map is taken from the consented Stornoway Wind Farm, just to give context to the site for the Stornoway Wind Farm and how it relates to the application site that is subject to the application being considered by the board today. So the Stornoway Wind Farm site is to the north and south of the Pentland Road. It is all west of the A867. It's indicated by the area bounded red. It has 33 wind turbines. The 24 turbines of tip height 180 metres are all located to the west of the development area, and those of 156 metres are those that would be closer to the road. The map has been overmarked roughly just with the Lewis Hub site indicated by the green. The cumulative viewpoints that will follow are taken from the Eilean Monument car park out at Holm, and another one below Croch na Croiche on the castle grounds. The slide has been put together just to give context to the various visualization viewpoints that will follow in the remainder of this presentation. So, starting on the bottom left-hand side of the slide is viewpoint 19. That is taken at the Thrimthú on a raised area of ground at Thrimthú. It's broadly opposite the Grimshad Road end, and it's the site of our scheduled monument, Stone Circle. So that's the first one. Then across the bay, we're moving over to viewpoint 3 in the centre on the left of on the right of the slide, which is taken from within the village of Lower Sandwick. Viewpoint 4, which is taken from Sandwick Cemetery. Viewpoint 7, which is at the car park, which leads to the path to the Eilean Memorial. Then coming back across the bay to viewpoint 9, that's a path below Croch na Croiche in the castle grounds. Viewpoint 12 is up on the top left-hand side of the slide. That is a path to some Scottish water plant It's a kind of, again, like an elevated area. It's accessed off the Pentland Road. And it gives like an open view across both the Creed North part of the site for the peat restoration and across to where it is proposed to develop on the Arnishmoor part of the site. Then there are a further 2 visualisations on the route, on the A867 route coming into Stornoway. First of all, viewpoint 13, which is at the entrance to the Creed Park, and then viewpoint 14, which is at Lochside Arena. So I'll take members through those visualisations now. So this first visualisation, taken at the Trimdooth Stone Circle, looking broadly northeast towards the building, the complex of buildings that is proposed to accommodate the substations. The turbine in the centre of that is the turbine at the Creed Enterprise Park. The Lochs Road can be seen on the right of the image. So if I now move to viewpoint 3, this is taken within the village of Lower Sandwick, and it is looking directly west towards the proposed development site. The existing view is in the top of the slide, and the photo montage that shows like a mock-up of the proposed buildings is shown on the bottom slide. The buildings from this viewpoint will appear above the horizon and are indicated by their position is indicated by the arrow that I've added to the slide. The raised area of the castle grounds are the hill to the right. You can see the Goat Island buildings further to the right again. Taking you to the next slide, this is taken just at as you enter the Sandwick Cemetery. Again, the top slide is the existing view, looking out across Stornoway Harbour. The raised area you can see in the distance is the castle grounds, and the photo montage on the bottom again indicates how you will view the buildings on the horizon, sitting just to the left on the horizon of the high point of the castle grounds. This is viewpoint 7, and this is taken from the car park that leads to the path to the Eilean Memorial. Again, the existing view is at the top. So in the existing view, you can see the Arnish fabrication shed to the left, the Deepwater Port platform, and the areas where rock was won, the faces that remain in the visible following the rock excavation there. And the buildings, if you can see, like in the photo montage down below, the buildings would appear again on the horizon to the right of the Deepwater Port. This is a cumulative viewpoint from the same position. So this shows what the proposed building would, how the proposed building would be viewed cumulatively with the consented Stornoway wind farm. The wireframe at the top shows how the buildings would appear above the horizon and how they would relate to the array of turbines on the move further west. And then the cumulative viewpoint at the bottom translates that into the actual view from that position. This is viewpoint 9, and this is on the network of paths that leads up to the high point of the castle grounds to Crochna Crochia. and it is looking onto the, if you like, onto the end of the HVDC platform, where you would have the buildings that could potentially rise to 30 metres. You would see glimpses of the buildings at various points on the paths, and the photo montage below shows how the buildings would appear from that near viewpoint. Within that photo montage, there is proposals for both bunding and planting to mitigate the visual effects of the buildings from that location. This is now taken as a cumulative viewpoint, and the wireframe at the top is basically like a bare earth model. So it shows the extent of the buildings without any vegetation. Basically, has no regard to any planting or existing or proposed or indeed bunding. And then that is mocked up in the photo montage below in cumulation with the Stornoway wind turbines, which are to the right of the proposed buildings. This viewpoint is from the Marybank picnic benches. It's an elevated viewpoint up where there are Scottish water tanks up above Marybank. And it is a view directly across the moor, where it is the north part of the site, which is proposed as having potential for peat restoration, over towards where the Arnish Moor site is proposed for development, and it shows the extent of the buildings on the in the landscape there. And then the two final viewpoints, these are taken on the A859. As you travel into Stornoway, these are treated as route receptors, so what people would see as they were travelling on the road into Stornoway. At the top is the existing view with the Creed Enterprise Park turbine visible in that shot. And then below, the photo montage, which is assumed view, shows the buildings with the existing vegetation to be retained. And then this viewpoint is more or less opposite where it's proposed the axis would be formed into the side. It's viewpoint 14. It's near Lochside Arena, and again you can see the tree line there on the top, and a slightly zoomed view in the photo montage at the bottom that would look onto the side of the AC platform. And it follows like two video clips taken with an overhead drone to allow members to see the detail of the actual site. And this slide has just been put together to kind of indicate the route of the drone, as I appreciate the area may not be familiar to all. So the drone starts at the Creed Enterprise Park at the southern extremity of the site and tracks along the A859. There's then like a turn, and the drone tracks out through the Arnish Road, where you can see like wider views across to Stornoway, and then enters the proposed site from the east and travels west through the centre of the site, ending up almost opposite the Lochside Arena again. And then the second clip, which is actually much shorter, it's actually just over a minute, is of the Creed North part of the site. Again, it starts just at the A859 and it travels west before turning south. And that concludes the slides. And Fiona, if I can just load the drone footage, please. Okay, so as I said, the footage starts at Creed Enterprise Park. The development site is the area of land on the right-hand side of the Lochs Road, and it stretches inland along the tree line to the far right. It includes that bank of trees coming north to south. On the left, you can see the Lochside Arena. It's an equestrian centre. And the proposed access from the Lochs Road into the development site is directly opposite the access road at the entrance to the arena. And you can see just where there's a bit of mud where there has been some traffic on that area. It's a plantation of trees running parallel to the road, and it is proposed to retain this plantation of trees, which will provide a natural screen of the development for road users. In the far distance, you can see the Stornoway substation, the Stornoway grid supply point, which is the big green building in the distance in the centre. Broad Bay in the distance, the castle grounds being the wooded area, and the town of Stornoway. The drone has now turned and it is travelling along the Arnish Road. So some of Macaulay Farm in the left-hand side. You can see the Creed River on the left-hand side. The wooded areas, the castle grounds, all on the left. And you can see the town of Stornoway in the top left of the image there. On the right-hand side, you can see some raised areas of ground. These are the rocky knolls from which it is proposed that rock would be won. And you can see the Creed as it runs out towards Stornoway Harbour. In the distance across the harbour, you can see Sandwick and Holm and the new deepwater terminal coming into view in the centre at the top, and the Irish fabrication shed. Some more of these rocky knolls in the foreground that would be opened and used to secure rock. The drone's now turning and it's heading west, and it lets you see the nature of the ground. So the actual site that would be developed would be coming just this side of that semi-improved ground and would run between the tree line to the right and the tree line to the left. It can be seen that the semi-improved ground differs from the rest of the moorland, and that's on account of former drainage and cultivation works that would have been carried out arising from its use as a farm. Reed Enterprise Park again coming into view on the far left, and as the drone travels up, you can see the Lochside Arena straight ahead, and then the wider moorland where Stornoway Wind Farm is proposed in the running out in the distance. Then to the far right, where the track is, that is the Teed North part of the site, and there's a separate video clip, a short video clip just showing that. So again, this drone footage starts at the main road just beside the Marybell Quarry, and it is travelling broadly southwest. This is the Creed North part of the site, which is proposed to provide potential for peat restoration works and potentially for biodiversity enhancement. and the track that you see that is visible through the centre of the moor there is what remains of the railway line that was associated with the extensive peat cutting work that was carried out for the historic Lewis Paraffin Works. The River Creed you can see to the left there. The loch in the distance is the loch beside the Lochside Arena. You can see the Lochside Arena now coming into view. The Creed Enterprise Park and Turbine, and the Stornoway Good Supply Point. Chair, that concludes the visuals, and if I may, I will just take members briefly through the report and recommendation. The report before the board today sets out a description of the proposed development, the site and its context, together with the advice of consultees, the contributions of community councils and the contributions submitted by members of the public. It sets out in summary the findings of our examination of the environmental impact assessment report and the supplementary environmental information that was submitted. These on the likely significant effects of the proposed development on the environment. The report presents an assessment of the proposed development against the policies and provisions of the development plan, and it has regard to all relevant material planning considerations. The key issues addressed in the report are the principle of development of this site for the proposed development, the impacts and effects upon landscape and visual amenity, impacts upon cultural heritage, upon soils and geology, hydrology, upon natural heritage including ecology and ornithology, noise, vibration and dust, traffic and transport, and considers the cumulative effects of the proposed development. Following the application of mitigation, most topics are concluded as either neutral, some carry limited weight, but overall our assessment has concluded that after application of the mitigation measures proposed and advised by consultees, the likely residual significant effects associated with the proposed development are the landscape and visual effects in localized areas, both during the construction phase and also during the permanent operation phase. And secondly, construction traffic effects, albeit localized, on a short section of the A859 carriageway. All the issues have been weighed and assessed in the report, and the significant effects have been weighed in a planning balance against the significant weight that has been given to the strategic electricity transmission infrastructure as a national development identified by NPF 4, which forms a part of the development plan. The report recommends approval for the grant of planning permission in principle, all subject to the further approval of matters specified and other conditions collectively designed to secure the mitigation of environmental effects of the development. The proposed conditions are structured to allow the matters specified to be the subject of phased submission, with enabling works single phase and each of the HVDC converter station and the 400 kV AC substations as separate phases. That does not preclude these being submitted as one or two applications. The recommendation is for approval subject to the conditions that have been set out in Appendix 1 to the report, and also the provision under Section 96 of the Road Scotland Act of a wear and tear agreement to ensure protection of damage to the roads network arising from the development. That concludes the presentation. I'm happy to take any questions now, Chair, or after the board has heard the other parties who are supposed to present to the hearing. Thank you, Chair.
Referring back to the protocol, are there any questions or comments from members of the board in the chamber or online? Okay, I thank Mrs. Ferguson for your report and presentation. We will now move on to presentations by 3 individuals who have made representations as selected and agreed by those making representations and advised to the Chief Executive or his representative 3 clear days prior to the meeting of this board. So firstly, can I now invite Josh Gibbons to present their representations to the board.
Thank you. I deeply appreciate the opportunity to speak today on this planning application. I've listened carefully to concerns raised, particularly online, and I recognise the profound sense of place and environmental guardianship that motivates every person who has spoken online, but also will speak after me, possibly in opposition. I share the concern for this island and its future. In just a few days, I expect to welcome my own child into the world in Stornoway. When I look at the world they will inherit, I cannot ignore the scientific fact that climate change is real, immediate, and the greatest long-term threat to our island and our way of life. My support for this development stems not from corporate interest, but from my individual conviction that this project represents the most responsible pathway to securing a safe, sustainable, and prosperous future for my child and for all future generations on the Isle of Lewis and more widely. The opposition must be measured against the mandatory planning framework set out by the Scottish Government. There is an overriding national imperative for this project. It is formally designated as a strategic renewable electricity generation and transmission infrastructure, which is a national development under the national planning framework. It's the highest level of planning priority. The infrastructure is non-negotiable and is integral to the Western Isles HVDC link, which will go towards supporting the binding net zero targets the Scottish Government has by 2045. The national development status creates a strong statutory presumption in favour of consent. Therefore, local objections must clearly demonstrate an unmitigated local impact that substantially outweighs this national strategic need. As the Council's expert report confirms, the residual adverse effects can be robustly managed by condition. I understand the most significant material planning objections centre on the environmental consequences. I believe the applicant has provided sufficient technically compliant mitigation measures, which is also secured by the planning conditions that have been recommended by the Planning Department of the Council. With regards to peatland and carbon management, I acknowledge that the site involves Class 1 deep peat, but the necessary scale of the infrastructure platform means total avoidance in the area is not necessarily practical. However, the applicant has demonstrated commitment to the mitigation hierarchy, using extensive probing, 8,925 individual probes, to inform the design. Crucially, they have revised the layout to actively avoid deeper peat deposits by entirely removing one major temporary laydown area, which was laydown area 1, covering 20,000 metres, and significantly reducing other areas. The remainder of the impact is governed by the outlined peat management plan, the detail of which will be secured by planning condition. This ensures excavated peat is handled correctly, preventing further loss of function and prioritising reuse for the restoration of degraded areas. Regarding biodiversity loss and compensation, my understanding is that the opposition frequently cites the high figure of an 83% net loss of biodiversity. I believe that this may be misleading because it represents a theoretical deficit for non-irreplaceable habitats before the mandatory compensation measures are applied as per the schedule conditions. There is a compensation commitment relating to the 20.02 hectares of irreplaceable blanket bog affected. And there will be an implementation of a rigorous 1:10 compensation ratio for this loss, as I understand it. This means the creation or enhancement of over 200 hectares of blanket bog offsite. This substantial binding commitment ensures compliance with National Planning Framework 4 Policy 3, achieving a positive outcome for nature restoration that balances the localised site loss. Additionally, concerns of an ornithological nature about protected species, including hen harriers and otters, are addressed by conditions requiring detailed species protection plans and pre-construction surveys, ensuring work is licensed and carefully managed prior to commencement. Moving on to visual and traffic management. Yes, the structure's a tool, up to 27.5 meters, and they will cause significant localized visual effects, particularly in areas like Lower Sandwich, as we saw in the visual montages. Whilst unavoidable, some of this is mitigated, and particularly so in the long term. This can be done as seen in the embedded design, including substantial earthworks such as screening bunds, native planting, and is complemented by a detailed colour strategy for the buildings, all of which are to be approved by planning conditions. And hopefully these effects will diminish as the planting establishes and matures over time. Moving to traffic and infrastructure, there is a construction traffic management plan, which includes the appointment of a site liaison officer to handle any community complaints, coordinate traffic, and ensure safety. Furthermore, the applicant is legally responsible, if agreed, for performing a baseline road condition survey and guaranteeing repairs to any damage caused. Moving on to the specific condition regarding a local community fund, I believe the inclusion of an independent index-linked community fund is essential for achieving a just transition, which is a core spatial objective of Scotland's National Planning Framework 4. The Lewis Hub is a national development whose primary benefit, grid stability and energy export, accrues nationally. A community benefit fund ensures that the host community, which bears the localized visual and environmental impacts, receives tangible long-term compensation. NPF 4 Policy 11C explicitly conditions support for energy projects on maximising these local socioeconomic benefits. By index linking this, if agreed, it ensures that the fund's value is protected against inflation over the 40-year operational life of the facility. Without this mechanism, the purchasing power of the annual payment would erode significantly over time, undermining the promise of a long-lasting legacy for future generations. Placing the fund under the management of an independent body would be essential if this was agreed, rather than the council or the developer themselves, preventing the money from being diverted to cover deficits in core local authority services, and guarantees that funds represent additional community value and is managed by local communities, diverting them towards priority projects for a fixed period of time, ensuring local empowerment and flexibility to adapt to changing needs. Regarding some arguments I've seen, which I believe lack planning weight, the loss for private view or potential property devaluation, or the financial motives of the applicant or concerns over corporate profit, or the wider distribution or price of the energy produced. Whilst I may share these concerns, it's important to say that they are not conditions that have any planning weight here. And finally, to conclude, the Council's professional report concludes that subject to the conditions laid out, the application is compliant with the overarching imperative of the National Planning Framework 4, a document that prioritizes strategic renewable energy infrastructure. I urge the board to look beyond the volume of the general opposition and focus on the professional evidence. The environmental impacts are identified, minimized through design, and formally compensated for via a large, legally binding commitment to habitat restoration. To deny this application is not to protect the environment, it is to delay the fundamental transition required for our future. Therefore, I ask that you approve this application, secure the necessary planning conditions and local community benefit fund, and allow this crucial infrastructure to proceed, ensuring a resilient energy future for my child, the Isle of Lewis, and the wider country as a whole. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Gibbons, are there any questions or comments from members of the board? Very good. We can now invite Gavin Douglas and Kimberley East to present their representations to the board.
Beyond, right. My name is Gavin Douglas. Because we are limited of the 788 odd objectors to only 2 of us being able to speak, I'm speaking on behalf of two of us, and Kimberly will speak on another two. So my first part is to read out a statement from Ben Gunn Ellis. And I'll just read his words, which is, I hold a first-class honours degree in mathematics and a certificate in pharmaceutical design. I am a crofter living on Lewis. This development should not go ahead for multiple reasons, and I wish to address three aspects of this proposed development. Firstly, any development of the ScotWind Plan option N4 off the west coast of Lewis will rely on this proposed hub, and so the size and design of the hub is dependent on the specification of the N4 development and its consent. Conversely, the development of N4 is reliant upon this hub development. For these reasons, the hub would be a part of ScotWind, which relies on the use of Crown Estate Scotland assets. It's my contention that land reform principles, as exemplified by the following 2017 quote from the Land Reform Secretary Rosanna Cunningham, provide an invaluable context for judging the weight which should be given to various factors involved. In 2017, Rosanna Cunningham said, This is a historic day. The management and resources of the Crown Estate now rest with the people of Scotland, and we have a genuine, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to use them to change the fabric of Scottish society, placing the needs of local coastal communities at the centre of our long-term planning for these considerable assets. The above quote illuminates the way that developments such as this hub, which are a manifestation of government's spatial energy strategy, are actually a corruption of the public good. Instead of embodying the holistic policy which benefits our communities, this development is part of a vision which sees the future of communities being blighted by mega industrialisation and international corporate exploitation, which are clearly the opposite of what was promised to us. This impact of this development and its connected upstream and downstream projects will damage the local environment and cause seismic economic stress and pressure rather than address the needs of the local and coastal communities. The energy produced would be exported and the enormous profits will go to big corporations. Secondly, the assessment of cumulative impacts should necessarily involve consideration of the ScotWind project development plans. However, the projects within Table 4.1 in the EIA document do not include N4 and its associated onshore infrastructure. This alone renders the EIA not fit for purpose, and the Board and Council should take this into account in its deliberations. Thirdly, I'd like to relate an exchange which took place between myself and Councillor McSween earlier this year. We were speaking on the subject of judging the suitability and otherwise of local renewables and grid infrastructure projects. I asked him what he would consider to be an unacceptable number of people moving away from the area due to the impacts of these developments. He replied he was unable to do so. I and my associates know some folk who've already moved away from these islands because of the planned developments. While much talk has been heard by community benefits packages, I propose a wiser course would be to look at the vision of the Scottish Government's Sustainable Development Impact Assessment tool that has been designed for use by local authorities. It states that an essential condition which must be fulfilled is that development and policies do not make life unbearable. I would broaden the question that I put to Councillor McSween to one of the Planning Board and the whole Council. How many people may feel forced to move away, and how many who are not in a position to move would feel as though they cannot bear the developments for any number of reasons? The EIA of the Sectorial Marine Plan for Offshore Wind, published in 2022, lists the health impacts due to ScotWind project construction and site operation for onshore populations on Lewis to be in the categories of minor to major, given that it's only reasonable to presume that there would be at least some similar effects for the Lewis Hump project. The communities here are fragile due to the age demographic, but also form the nucleus of the Gaelic-speaking culture. The Council should employ the precautionary principle such that we are not propelled into a future that sees folk moving away from our communities, segments of the population pushed into physical and mental health problems, which some would find unbearable. And that sees an irrevocable degradation of Gaelic-speaking culture due to extra pressure and demand on local social and health services. This pressure, due to the influx of thousands of workers for a period of years, in addition to the blighted industrialisation of the landscape. I submit that the board should recommend to the council to refuse to grant permission for this development. Should the council feel the need for a moratorium on developments in order to allow greater clarity to emerge before making a decision, I would support that decision. I wish also to forward some comments from associates. Janet Smith of UIG gave a simple justification of why do we need the interconnector between Irish and Dundonald. In a nutshell, we should create renewable energy locally for local use, and there would be no need for the industrialisation of this excessively natural island and the surrounding particularly sensitive seas. Looking more broadly, Janet went on to comment that now it's a good time to have a moratorium or pause in this misdirected industrial juggernaut of renewables. Industry, indeed, it's become essential if we are to save any sort of future for Scotland, its islands, its communities. Planners and government need to stop, assess cumulative impact, and then work out a real plan for the future. It's the only way. And finally commented that it seems a very unfair deal giving objectors merely minutes to present a whole way of life and its integral connection to our native lands and seas. We should have no room for the tragedy of the loss of our sought-after dark skies, which are as essential now as they were eons ago. For some, the industrialisation of this island will burden and discredit the whole way of life. Thank you for the board for listening to those comments. Will I move straight on to mine, or do you want to ask any questions?
Well, do any members of the board have any questions to that first statement? No. Mr. Douglas.
Gavin Douglas from Ness. I was brought up all my life with renewable energy. As the son of a hydro boy, I understand the undeveloped resources and the benefits which it can give. Instant controllable power generation with relatively little impact to the environment. Most hydro schemes merely increase the depth of existing lochs, some by as little as 6 feet, whether it's from small schemes, large schemes, run of river, tidal or pumped. They were pioneered by the many great Scottish civil engineers from Baptist Shore and Morton, James Williamson Partners, etc., many of whom have exported their vision throughout this country and the rest of the world. The legacy could also be seen in Cruachan and Loch Orside, Sloy, Foyers, Lanark, Tummel, Nant, and 1,800 megawatts in Dinorwic in North Wales, also designed by the Scottish civil engineers. With further potential, purely for hydro, within Scotland of 10 gigawatts of large schemes in Scotland and over 10 gigawatts of smaller schemes. And in fact, one scheme in particular looked at Loch Lomond at Craigroyston of 4,800 megawatts. Just to put that in the picture, Scotland's maximum peak requirements at any time is 4 gigawatts. And that one scheme on its own would have been able to, from one power station, been able to supply the whole of Scotland. The added benefits from recreation, flood control, irrigation, water supply makes it madness not to exploit any of these. And in fact, Mott MacDonald in Glasgow have even proposed a tidal lagoon for exploration in Cardigan Bay. When you consider that Scotland's requirement could already be met by an instant renewable source, it's madness that we're continuing to look at wind. Hydro is the opposite of wind, reliable, controllable and economical. Many schemes almost 100 years old and still performing as intended today. Wind output varies from 35% to 3% of the UK requirement, and to look at something so fickle as being a potential power supply is outrageous. OHT, the Outer Hebrides Tourism, says that 51% of businesses are opposed to renewable energy developments planned, such as the planned Spurn This includes wind farms, industrialisation of the island, and the infrastructure for the interconnector at Arnish. Further, 9% were unsure of any benefit from this industrial complex. For OHT businesses on the west side, the figures are more stark. 71% were opposed to these developments. Amongst those, 20% would expect a reduction in tourism, and 15% were worried about the visual impacts, with 10% expecting a negative effect on wildlife, particularly on marine life, and 10% expecting a negative impact on the ferries. We're not opposed to renewable energy, but we are opposed to the wind industry, which needs to exploit such large swathes of land and sea for little real return. Certainly it's uncontrollable, intermittent and unreliable, as the fickle wind cannot be guaranteed. Hence, households have been hit with soaring bills. This year alone in the UK, over £6.6 billion has been paid to wind companies not to produce electricity. Is this really so-called green? Although some temporary jobs may be created, the scale is excessive for the return. In reality, if this continues, there will not be an increase of population, but a reduction similar to Highland clearances too. If you show support to this interconnector, it must be presumed that you have predetermined a support for the highly environmentally destructive offshore and onshore installations on the island, in order to allow the exploitation of these islands, making them into an industrial wasteland or the dustbin of Scotland. Any industry that feels the need to bribe in order to accept must be questioned as to their real motives. Any industry which pays bribes must be collecting that money from its customers in order to pay those bribes. Ask yourself, where would this money come from? It comes from us, the consumers and the taxpayers. These industrialists are not being philanthropic or generous with their money. Are you willing in 25 years, when the scheme falls apart, to say that you supported this destruction, like those who supported the asbestos and the chromium industries of the past? Their legacy was cancerous, just like the wind industry will be viewed in the future, like the rusting hulks of the wind turbines left in Hawaii from the companies long since bust and not having any more finance to be able to dismantle them. I see three types of Hebrideans: those who have lived in the island, who love the islands for what they are, those who crave being like the mainland, and who want to see an industrialization. And those of us who've come back to the islands, I with my wife, who was obviously born in Stornoway and wanted to come home. For the sake of the islands, you owe them at least to offer a moratorium on the developments and to look at the impacts of which the islands may never recover. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Douglas, any questions or comments from members of the board? We move to Kimberley East now. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm reading a statement on behalf of Jean MacLeod, Josie Cross and myself, Kimberley East. So I'm going to start with Jean MacLeod's. I object to the development, firstly on grounds of overdevelopment and lack of justification of need. Has the developer provided sufficient evidence to justify the scale of the project for the local community needs, as opposed to serving a much wider multinational industry? This large-scale development, combined with other existing or planned projects in the area, will contribute to an unacceptable cumulative impact of industrialisation. This development is seen as an enabler for future projects which have yet to go through due process, and future planning decisions cannot be assumed. This hub is one of a wider network of developments. Each project is considered individually, which artificially reduces their perceived impact, avoiding proper scrutiny. This approach contradicts local planning policies, including the Scottish planning policy, which states that cumulative impacts must be fully assessed before determining major infrastructure projects, and the CNES local development plan, which seeks to protect natural and cultural heritage from inappropriate development. I also object on environmental grounds. The damage to peatland cannot be underestimated. Peat stores carbon, toxic chemicals and water. If it is degraded, the said carbon, chemicals and water is dispersed with very damaging consequences. There would also be an impact of amenity through noise and light pollution 24/7. There will be an unacceptable visual impact, industrial in nature, out of character with its rural setting. There are infrastructure and road safety concerns, traffic and safety issues. Heavy traffic will cause considerable damage to our roads and greatly inconvenience all road users, locals, tourists, cruise terminal passengers, etc. There will be an unacceptable strain put on local services, insufficient ferry capacity, very busy flights, lack of accommodation, no extra policing resources, projects elsewhere show crime levels rise, no extra NHS or emergency services capacity. The local tourism industry has expanded greatly since 2020 when CNES invited the renewable industry to come here. Tourism will suffer economically if the renewable industry does arrive. This oversized hub is the enabler for the mass industrialisation of Lewis. To save the planet, renewables should be built near to where the energy is needed rather than destroy the very land you are trying to save. In less than 2 years, the Royal National Mod comes to Stornoway. How will our visitors get here? Where will they stay? What damage will this march for renewables do to our cultural tourism? And what damage will it do to Lewis and Harris and their occupants? Thank you. That was from Jean McLeod.
That's fine.
Yeah.
Questions or comments from members of the board? Nope.
Okay, so this one's from me, Kimberley East. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the record. I wish to raise serious concerns about the human health and environmental impacts of the proposed Arnish Hub development on Arnish Moor, and to urge planning officers to recommend, at minimum, a moratorium until fundamental uncertainties are resolved. I'd like to start by talking about Class 1 peatland. Irreversible loss and policy conflict. According to the developer's own environmental impact assessment, the Arnish site lies on Class 1 peatland, the highest value and most sensitive category in Scotland's peatland carbon and priority habitat map. Nature Scot guidance makes clear that loss of Class 1 peat is effectively permanent. Under NPF4 Policy 5 soils, development on deep peat is only supportable where disturbance is avoided wherever possible and where a detailed site-specific justification is provided. Peat of this quality is not simply soil. It is a carbon store developed over thousands of years, and disturbing it risks both large carbon release and the production of fine particulate matter. Next, air quality, PM exposure and health risks. When peat is excavated, stripped or allowed to dry, it breaks down into a fine windblown dust. SEPA notes that exposed peat surfaces release significant fine particulate matter unless continuously saturated. The Institute of Air Quality Management's 2014 dust guidance classifies all large-scale earthworks, especially on dry, friable materials, as high risk for generating PM10 and PM2.5, even with mitigation. These are the same fine particles identified by the World Health Organization as among the most harmful pollutants to human health. In 2021, WHO reduced the annual guideline from PM 2.5 to just 5 micrograms per cubic metre because evidence shows harm occurs at extremely low levels. Diesel exhaust from the HGV movements, excavators and generators required for a project of this scale is classified by the International Agency for Research on Cancer as a Group 1 carcinogen, proven to cause cancer in humans. In short, the risk to nearby residents and workers is credible and substantial and far from fully assessed. Under the Environmental Principles Scotland Act 2021, where there is credible risk of serious or irreversible harm, the precautionary principle must apply. Uncertainty is a reason not to approve, not to proceed regardless. Next, the need case is not demonstrated. Planning must be proportionate, evidence-led and based on actual consented generation, not hypothetical build-out. Consented or operational schemes on Lewis today: Stornoway Wind Farm, Ushnas Wind Farm, Pentland Road Wind Farm, Bain Greechuk. Not yet consented: Sporanamara, the principal driver for the transmission capacity. Yet the Arnish hub is designed to export capacity far beyond the combined output of consented schemes. To approve the hub in advance of the very generation it is meant to serve is to preempt future planning decisions and abandon the precautionary approach required by law. Next, context, community and ethical concerns. Nearly 800 residents have objectives, and I'm not sure anybody is listening to them, to us. People across these islands are frightened, not only of the hub itself, but of what it enables. Further industrialisation, further peak disturbance, more dust, noise and traffic, and a permanent shift in the character of these islands. These are material planning concerns. I also note respectfully that while community benefit payments are not material to planning, early distribution of such funds creates an appearance of influence. When financial gestures occur before a project has consent, it undermines confidence in the fairness and transparency of the system. Finally, a reasonable and lawful request, a moratorium. Given the irreversible loss of Class 1 peat, insufficient assessment of air quality and health risks, absence of a proven need case, lack of consent for the key generation scheme, and community concerns about cumulative industrialisation, I respectfully ask planning officers to recommend a moratorium until a full carbon balance assessment is published, a robust air quality risk assessment is provided, the need case is evidenced with actual consented generation, the cumulative effects on the Western Isles are transparently assessed. A pause, a moratorium is the least that responsible governance requires. Once peat is gone, once the landscape is destroyed, once the health impacts are felt, there is no going back. And can I just repeat, there is no going back. Thank you.
East. So following on here within the protocol. Sorry.
I've just got one more.
Yes, indeed.
It's
yes.
quite short. This one's from Josie Cross. People have grown up here in an unspoilt and peaceful environment. Others have moved here for these qualities. Some say that this is a place of healing. I would agree. I love and respect this island, the unique peacefulness, the wealth of wildlife, and the beautiful and kind people. The Lewis Hub, as part of an industrial development of this scale, would drastically and, in my opinion, devastatingly change this precious island. Thank you.
So at this point, can I ask if members of the board have any questions or comments to make following those statements? No. Well, can I take this opportunity to thank Josh Gibbons, Gavin Douglas and Kimberley East for your time and attendance to this meeting this morning and this afternoon. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you. Now, following the protocol in front of me, we will now move on to presentations by community councils. Firstly, it's North Lochs Community Council and Samick Community Council have both intimated their wish to address the board. Each community council will be allotted up to 10 minutes to present their representations. So firstly, can I invite Rosemary McCritchie, who represents Sandwick Community Council, to address the board?
Good afternoon, Chair, members of the Planning Board. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm speaking on behalf of Sandwick Community Council to formally object to the proposed HVDC converter station and associated battery energy storage system at Arnish near Stornoway. This is a major industrial scale development proposed for a highly sensitive location. The impacts on the environment, the community and character of the surrounding area are likely to be profound and irreversible. The site lies on deep peatland, which is one of the most efficient natural carbon sinks in the world. Large-scale excavation and disturbance of peat for this project will result in the release of significant quantities of stored carbon dioxide, directly undermining the project's claimed climate benefits. According to information published on the UK government's own website, peatlands are the largest carbon stores in the country. When in a healthy condition, they absorb carbon slowly, but can continue doing so indefinitely. Peatland soils can be over 10 metres deep, holding immense carbon stocks that have developed over many millennia. In fact, the carbon held in the deep peat soils of fens and raised bogs is estimated to be 8 times greater than that stored in an equivalent area of tropical rainforest. Research by Nottingham-Trent University further highlights that while renewable energy development is important, locating such developments on peatland can actually undermine the green energy transition. The carbon release from disturbed peat may outweigh the environmental gains from renewable generation over many years. In addition to this, the site borders the Lewis Castle grounds, the Creed River, and one of the few areas of mature woodland in the Western Isles. These areas support important biodiversity, are used extensively by residents and visitors, and are integral to the local landscape character. The potential for ecological harm and pollution from construction runoff is considerable. The proposal would place serious strain on already fragile local infrastructure. The main access route into Stornoway is narrow, heavily used, and not designed to cope with sustained large-scale industrial traffic. Prolonged heavy goods vehicle movements will lead to congestion, accelerated road deterioration, and increased safety risks for all road users, including school children and commuters, and an ambulance throughway, creating safety issues for communities beyond that area. The island's accommodation, ferry capacity, public services and healthcare facilities are already operating at capacity. Bringing hundreds of temporary construction workers to the site for an extended period will overwhelm these services, disrupt local business operations and place additional pressure on emergency services. In short, the construction of this facility threatens to break the fragile infrastructure that residents depend upon daily. The inclusion of a large battery energy storage system presents significant safety concerns. BESS facilities are known to pose a risk of thermal runaway and chemical fire, which are extremely difficult to extinguish and require specialist firefighting expertise. Stornoway's fire service, as we know, has limited capacity to respond to such an event, and the consequences of an uncontrolled fire at Arnish could be severe, threatening nearby moorland, the Lewis Castle grounds, and even residential areas. It's unclear how adequate mitigation or response capability could be provided on the island. The proposal will have a major visual impact on the approach to Stornoway, one of the most iconic and historically significant views on the island. The structure will dominate the skyline and alter the setting of the harbour, the castle grounds and the surrounding villages. The villages of Lower Sandwick and Sandwick East Street are specifically identified in the applicant's own environmental assessments as being among the most adversely affected. These are established residential areas containing homes, local businesses and heritage features. The long-term effect on amenity and property value will be substantial. We are also concerned about the cumulative impact. This application represents the first stage of a larger industrial complex. Additional BESS and substation facilities will follow. This pattern of incremental approvals, often described as salami slicing, prevents full assessment of the true overall impact on the landscape, the environment and the community. Furthermore, it must be noted that the national grid is currently nowhere near ready to accept power generated in the Outer Hebrides. Despite this, large-scale renewable projects are being advanced, primarily to attract subsidy payments and investment opportunities for multinational developers. This practice, which is described as subsidy harvesting, where corporate profit is prioritised over genuine progress towards a sustainable, community-benefiting energy transition. The scale and scramble of big business to secure guaranteed grid capacity also risks pushing community-owned energy projects off the grid altogether. The contribution made by organisations such as Point and Sandwich Trust and Galson Estate Trusts demonstrates the real and lasting benefits of community ownership, reinvesting profits locally, supporting social programmes and promoting genuine sustainability. This is how renewable development on these islands should look. In reality, this is not a single development, but the start of a major industrial expansion. While multinational corporations will move on to new ventures, the people of these islands will be left with the permanent infrastructure and landscape changes that result. Local residents have expressed serious concern about this proposal. The perceived apathy amongst islanders in the early stages of consultation does not indicate a lack of care or interest. Rather, it reflects a community unaccustomed and ill-equipped to face developments of such scale and complexity. As awareness and understanding have grown, so too very much has the level of concern and opposition. There's also increasing frustration that the public confidence in the planning process has been damaged by the perception that the key decisions are being made before full approval is granted. Instances where politicians have appeared to break ground on sites not yet approved have undermined trust and created a sense that community voices are being disregarded. Comhairle and Siar has both the authority and the duty to ensure that planning standards are applied consistently and fairly. When an individual applies for planning permission for a house or building, strict limits are imposed on height, scale, and impact on neighbouring properties and the wider environment. The same principles should apply here. No member of the public will be permitted to construct a building that overshadows its surroundings, risks environmental damage, or poses significant safety hazards. There is no justification for holding large corporations to a lesser standard. This alone should be sufficient grounds for the Council to reject the application in its current form. What of the future? What of the islands after construction? Once the turbines, converter stations and battery storage facilities are all in place, where will we be as a community when our landscape has been permanently altered? Has there been any independent research or strategic planning to consider the full long-term consequences of these cumulative developments? What will the future of tourism look like when visitors arrive to an industrial skyline rather than a natural one? And what of the people who be expected to live beside this infrastructure every day, raising families, running businesses and maintaining community life in the shadow of industrial installations? What of the wildlife, the birds and the marine life? If this pattern continues unchecked, it risks creating the very outcome that the Council has repeatedly warned against: depopulation. Young people and professionals will choose to leave rather than live in an increasingly industrialised environment. The future of the Outer Hebrides must not be sacrificed in the name of industrial expansion. Sandwich Community Council supports renewable energy and responsible development. However, this proposal represents poor siting and unsustainable industrialisation of an environmentally and culturally important area. We therefore respectfully urge the Planning Board to refuse planning permission for this application. The long-term environmental, visual and social costs are too high, but the risks are too great for the claimed benefits to justify proceeding. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Rosemary McCutcheon. And can I open out for any questions or comments by members of this board? Oh. Okay, can I now invite Kevin McCandy, representing North Lochs Community Council, to address the board?
Chair and members, good afternoon. I am Kevin McCandy and I'm speaking on behalf of North Lochs Community Council. Thank you for this opportunity to address you today. As the proposed development lies within the boundary of the North Lochs Community Council, we are a statutory consultee under planning legislation, representing local residents directly affected by this application. While we recognise the strategic importance of the Lewis Hub and the potential investment it may bring to the island, we have serious concerns, particularly around road safety and the lack of any meaningful community benefit, which we believe must be addressed prior to any consent being granted. To support our points, we've provided a map handout illustrating some of our key concerns. Let me begin with road safety. The A859 south of Stornoway is the busiest and the most strategically important road in the Outer Hebrides. The section between the Arnish Junction and the Creed Enterprise Park, as was actually highlighted in the first part of the drone footage that we have seen, is particularly hazardous, narrow, undulating and poorly aligned, with very limited visibility, concealed access points and no refuge for cyclists. Despite double white lining and a 40-mile-per-hour speed limit, overtaking and speeding frequently occur, posing a serious risk to vulnerable road users. Shading from mature trees further reduces visibility during peak commuting hours, and there is a documented history of accidents and near misses. This section of the A859 is already under considerable strain, characterised by poor alignment, limited verge, recurring flash flooding and signs of subsidence and surface damage, particularly where the road crosses deep peat. These are not routine maintenance issues, but serious safety concerns, as highlighted in the planning officer's assessment. The current conditions already compromise the route's suitability for cyclists and would be further exacerbated by the introduction of very large, slow-moving construction and operational vehicles associated with the Lewis Hub and other co-located developments. While SSEN's own environmental impact assessment acknowledges traffic impacts, it does not propose any proactive safety measures. Assurances made during the pre-application consultation with communities have not resulted in any tangible action. Although SSEN commissioned a feasibility study for a cycle lane extension, its findings remain unpublished to date, and SSEN has confirmed that no provision for a cycle lane is included in this actual application. Given the high-risk nature of this corridor, we consider it essential that the existing cycle refuge lane be extended northward from the Creed Park Recycling Centre. This extension should continue past the Lewis Hub site, the Stornoway GSP substation and the Arnish Junction. At a very minimum, it should reach the Creed River Car Park, but ideally, in an ideal world, be extended to the Marybank Quarry entrance, where pedestrian infrastructure actually begins. This is not just a desirable add-on, it is a necessary safety intervention that must be delivered in advance of any major construction works. We welcome the Planning Service's recognition that the EIA underestimates the impacts of the development on this stretch of the A859, and note the inclusion of proposed condition 3BXI, which requires a scheme of sustainable travel and road carriageway improvements to be developed in consultation with Comhairle roads and bridges, including options for the cycle refuge lane. While this is a positive step, we would urge the Planning Applications Board to go further and ensure that the cycle lane extension is not merely considered, but explicitly delivered as a core component of the approved scheme. To achieve this, condition 3BXI must be strengthened. It provides a framework for discussion but does not secure funding or any guarantee of implementation. We would therefore recommend that the Planning Applications Board require SSEN to fund the cycle lane extension through a formal developer contribution agreement. This would ensure the infrastructure is not only considered, but financed and delivered in a timely and accountable manner. We would also support the planning's proposed inclusion of a wear and tear agreement under Section 96 of the Road Scotland Act, but believe it must be complemented by proactive safety measures, including the cycle lane extension. The construction expected is going to last 4 years in the lead up to the 2020-30 SEN's delivery target. The need for early and effective mitigation is actually critical. Turning now to the cumulative impacts. The environmental impact assessment focuses narrowly on construction traffic, overlooking the wider development pressures this HVDC station will inevitably generate. Its strategic role guarantees that additional infrastructure, such as wind farm substations and battery storage, will ultimately cluster nearby, with lasting impacts on the surrounding area and road network. Spirit Namara is already consulting on a substation directly opposite the Lewis Hub Access Road. SSEN's position that future generation proposals fall outside their remit as a transmission network licence holder may well be technically accurate, but is it misleading in planning terms? Locating a major grid asset like this creates predictable development pressure. These are not speculative impacts, but foreseeable consequences of the station's strategic function and the need to connect consented renewable energy projects to the grid. Assessing the HVDC station in isolation overlooks the cumulative impacts on infrastructure, road safety, and community well-being, impacts that are foreseeable and directly linked to this strategic function. Planning decisions must be considered the reality of development pressure, not just the technical boundaries of the actual applicant's remit. In addition, planned projects including the Stornoway GSP substation upgrade, the Stornoway wind farm development, the Deepwater Port extension, the Marybank Quarry extension, and overhead line improvements will further intensify heavy construction traffic and disruption along this already pressurised stretch of the A859. And looking to the policy framework, Policy E112 of the Outer Hebrides Local Development Plan enables the Comhairle to negotiate developer contributions for infrastructure proportionate to the scale and the cumulative impact of any development. We continue to request that SSEN be required to fund the cycle lane extension and any associated road improvements through a developer contribution agreement. This is a proportionate and a justifiable approach given the scale of the development and its cumulative impacts on the local road network. While Condition 3BXI provides a helpful framework for any negotiation, it does not guarantee a delivery. A developer contribution agreement would provide that clarity, that accountability, and a funding certainty. We believe this mechanism should be used to secure the cycle lane extension as a defined infrastructure improvement. What we are most concerned about is community safety. The A859, as we are all aware, is a vital route for residents and visitors. Without intervention, this development risks compromising road safety and increasing the likelihood of serious accidents at a very minimum. Extending the cycle lane, ensuring adequate road improvements and maintenance would provide a tangible, lasting benefit that could help mitigate the risks posed by this and any future projects. In conclusion, we respectfully urge the Planning Applications Board to ensure that road safety improvements, including a cycle lane extension, are secured as a condition of consent should this application be approved. The inclusion of condition 3BXI provides a clear opportunity to do so, but must be reinforced by a developer contribution agreement to ensure delivery. This is essential to protect our community and ensure that national energy infrastructure does not come at the expense of local safety. We believe this is a reasonable and proportionate request given the scale and potential impact of the Lewis Hub. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Open out for questions or comments from members of the board. No. Well, can I thank both Rosemary McClitchie and Kevin McCandy on behalf of Samet Community Council and North Lochs Community Council for your attendance and contributions this morning and this afternoon. With that, I will now adjourn the hearing for lunch and a comfort break, and we shall return at 1:30. See you all then. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I re-adjourn this hearing of the Planning Board. Looking at the protocol, we're now like to hear a presentation by the applicant's agent, Mr. Murray Agnew.
Yeah. Thank you. Excuse me. Chair, members, good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Murray Agnew, and I'm a town planning specialist, and I'm employed by Scottish Hydroelectric Transmission. I'm here today with my colleagues to support your understanding of our proposed development. In the time available, I won't be able to cover all aspects of our application. However, my colleagues and I will be happy to answer questions that you may have. So I'll begin by covering the background to the development and describing what drives the need for it from a system planning perspective. Scottish Hydroelectric Transmission is the transmission licence holder for the north of Scotland, and we have a duty under the 1989 Electricity Act to develop and maintain an efficient, coordinated and economical system of electricity transmission, and a separate duty to facilitate competition between current and new generators of electricity. Where there is a requirement to extend, upgrade or reinforce our transmission network, we will always aim to achieve this in an environmentally aware, technically feasible and economically viable option, which would cause the least disturbance to the environment and the people who use the area. The development proposal that is being discussed here today is for a strategic electricity transmission hub known as the Lewis Hub. The hub is required for the purpose of contributing towards establishing a common and coordinated approach to the development for the future network reinforcements as identified in the Holistic Network Design Report, which was a report published by the National Grid Energy System Operator in 2022. The pathway to 2020 HND states that as an integrated design for the electrical transmission network is needed to connect new large-scale renewable sources of energy. Therefore, there is a requirement to deploy additional clean energy resources to meet the country's energy and climate change objectives. The Western Isles connection is a key contributing part of the HND. The connection is required to substantially strengthen the local transmission network and to support new offshore and onshore connections. It would further help to facilitate the export of future renewable generation from the Western Isles to demand centres nationally. It is critical that investment, including the proposed development, is delivered in full, along with other elements of the transmission system reinforcement required, as failing to progress any part of the holistic network design would lead to 2030 targets being missed. The proposed development will introduce a high voltage DC converter station that acts to convert power from alternating current to direct current for onward transmission. The HVDC converter would be served by a 132 to 400 kV AC substation into which contracted generation development would connect. The scale and dimensions of the proposed infrastructure are stated in the officer report, so I won't read these out in the limited time I have today. It is, however, worth noting that the large scale of the buildings proposed is driven by the functional requirements of the equipment they would contain. As well as facilitating energy exportation, the proposed development will serve a key role in connecting the Outer Hebrides electricity distribution network to the mainland transmission network via the already consented landfall at Arnish Point. The proposal also includes a large area that would not be used for development infrastructure, but which was included to allow for potential peat management solutions to be developed given the large volumes of peat that would require to be handled in construction. As some members may be aware or even recall, the reason that the intended landfall was previously consented at Arnish Point is that we had previously intended to locate our interconnecting infrastructure at Arnish, and we went as far as consenting that development in 2019. Changes in the parameters of the system requirements necessitated by the HND have rendered Arnish unsuitable based on its size constraints and its limitations in terms of achieving developer connections, however. The landfall point does remain suitable. So why Arnish Moor? Having already established a viable landfall nearby Arnish, we undertook a search for a location that could accommodate the development having regard to environmental, technical and economic considerations. Distance from the proposed development to the existing electricity network was also a key consideration. All of these factors direct us to the vicinity of the proposed site, where there are areas both large enough to accommodate the development while offering good connectivity to existing infrastructure and opportunity for future developments to connect. The area is also already influenced by some industrial elements. It was also an objective of the project to reduce the need for additional infrastructure, to use as little land as possible, and ultimately to reduce the size and cost of the proposed development. This is achieved by minimising the distance between the HVDC converter station and the AC connection point at the 400 kV substation. The optimal distance to be achieved in this instance is less than 1 kilometre, that being the point at which additional infrastructure would be necessitated, which supports the co-located arrangement that we are now proposing. In coming to a decision on the location of the proposal, we engaged regularly with the community. In early 2023, we undertook consultation on our initial site selection options. A site near Mary Bank was initially preferred from a technical perspective, and it was the most favourable in terms of a range of considerations, including peat volumes. Following further consultation in late 2023, and in response to public feedback, 3 new site options were introduced in the site selection process. These were at Creed North, Macaulay Farm and Arnish North. Technical, environmental and cost appraisals of these options was undertaken, and the new preferred site at Macaulay Farm was selected. The site was then taken forward into our formal pre-application consultation as the location for the Lewis Hub. The site at Creed North has also been included within the red line boundary as a potential site for peat management, as I've already said. No infrastructure would be located there. It is important that the site selection process is outlined, as it illustrates that contrary to the comments received in letters of representation, which stated that public consultation was inadequate, the proposed location of the development has, having regard to all other relevant site selection criteria, been heavily influenced by input from the community stakeholders. Such input included a strong preference being expressed that the site was to be relocated to the east of the A859. I will come back to address the representations more generally later. Sorry, I've gone too far there. I've already touched on the need for the development that is generated in part through our licence obligation and through the energy system operator's strategic system requirements, but it needs to be brought back into focus that the purpose of this meeting is to consider the development proposal on its planning merits, having regard to the development plan and other material considerations. These can include some of the factors that I've already mentioned. As well as considering the need in terms already discussed, the need in planning terms is recognised in the statutory statement of need that is the basis of National Development 3 and NPF 4, which establishes national development status and offers broad support for the principle of this type of development. This is not to negate the need to assess the proposal in the round, having regard to all of the relevant policies in the development plan. And it's not my intention to go into the detail of that assessment in the limited time that I have here today, other than to state that there is clear development plan support for all forms of renewable energy, including grid transmission infrastructure. Significant weight is also attached in the planning balance to development concerned with tackling the global climate and nature crises, and this is set out in the detailed and thorough assessment in the officer report. Although the planning application is for planning permission in principle, I should highlight that we have undertaken an environmental impact assessment that presents our proposals very much on a worst case basis in order to establish a realistic worst case design envelope within which the finalised design can fit. The coordination of this significant undertaking is what has led us to seek planning permission in principle, and this approach allows us to continue to refine and improve the design of the site during the initial consenting stage and into the detailed design stage in full cognisance of any planning requirements that may arise, such as the proposed conditions stated in Appendix 1 of the officer report. Excuse me. Overall, the detailed assessment of the proposed development against the development plan policies of relevance suggests no conflict with the aims and objectives of NPF 4 and the extant development plan. The proposed development would contribute to sustainable development in the transition to net zero in Scotland, and as the officer report has outlined, where the limited number of localised significant effects are predicted, these can be further mitigated and addressed through the detailed design, including through compliance with relevant conditions. Where there are residual effects, their limited and localised extent is outweighed by the clear policy support for the development, and such residual significant effects on the development of this nature are stated in policy terms as being inevitable and acceptable where mitigation is applied. As members are aware, the proposal has attracted a reasonably significant level of representations, raising concerns covered in detail in section 7 of the officer report. Many of the concerns raised relate to topics that have been subject of a comprehensive range of consultations with the relevant consultees and subject of commissioned advice from subject matter experts on behalf of the Council. There are no outstanding objections from any consultee or from any of the commissioned subject matter experts. This includes responses on key topic areas raised in objections. No material issues are raised in these representations that have not been addressed by the application or which would amount to a material consideration that would justify a departure from the development plan in our view. The recommendation in the officer report draws the same conclusion. Where necessary, we have worked with consultation bodies to address any concerns raised to date, and we have successfully achieved the removal of the limited number of holding objections that were initially received in relation to the application. We have reviewed the final comments received from the consultees and are content that where conditional requirements are suggested, we can address them as we move into the detailed design phase. We also acknowledge the comments received from the community councils. We acknowledge the concerns raised in their detailed comments on the proposal, with particular reference to roads impact and visual impact. As it is reflected in the officer report, however, no material issues have been raised that have not either been addressed by the application, the accompanying supporting information, and the proposed mitigation measures, or which cannot be addressed through compliance with the suggested conditions as we move into the next stage of the consenting process. We will, however, be happy to liaise with community councils as the proposals progress, should permission be granted. A strategic hub at Arnish Moor is required for the purpose of establishing a common and coordinated approach to development of the electricity transmission infrastructure that will contribute towards achieving necessary future network reinforcements identified by the system operator. The development is one of a number of developments of a similar nature that we are undertaking across the north of Scotland that will be key to establishing the foundations of a future where Scotland leads the way in providing clean and secure energy supply. In this respect, the development is part of a nationally coordinated response to a pressing challenge of how we build a secure and capable energy network that benefits generations to come. The development is expected to bring a range of positive benefits, including local jobs and investment, as well as legacy benefits. The development would also be key to achieving energy ambition in the Western Isles, including the repositioning of the Western Isles as a generator exporter, allowing for potential community ownership ambitions to be realised also. Of increasing importance is also that the upgrade of the network is critical to helping achieving energy security of supply at a time of increasing global energy insecurity. And we are proud to be early facilitators in this regard, helping to ensure that UK consumers are protected from potential future market pressures for the type of infrastructure we are proposing. At a more local level, the development would provide a more robust transmission connection to the mainland, improving local resilience. So in summary, there is clear support for the proposed development from the development plan. We have undertaken a detailed site selection and design evolution process, including engagement with stakeholders, which has sought to minimise potential environmental effects while balancing technical and economic considerations. We have undertaken an assessment of environmental effects, and we consider that we have achieved a development that is well located, environmentally aware, technically feasible, economically viable, and which would cause the least possible disturbance to the environment and the people who use the area. We'll now be happy to take any questions you have, and thank you for listening.
Thank you for that. Now, any questions from members of the board? Councillor George Murray.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask you for a little clarification. Just something you said a couple of minutes ago, Mr. Agnew. I can't remember the word you used. Was it redistribution to a more local level for electricity?
So this is in connection to, sorry, I think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
It's in connection to the existing Harris-Stornoway link. So the proposed interconnector would strengthen resilience in that respect, because it establishes a new transmission link to the mainland.
Chair, I thought you meant that you were going to be giving us our own power.
Any other questions from members of the board? I see Susan Thompson online.
Thank you, and thank you for that that information. Just a bit of clarity for me, please. What is the impact on our energy supply if this development doesn't go ahead as proposed?
Sir Agnew.
Hi, good afternoon. It's Colin Bell from SSEN Transmission. The overall proposal is to accommodate local generated capacity as well. So I think there is local distributed or local generated wind farms that would be included in that transmission link. So as Murray previously outlined, the other added benefit is that the link does provide that sort of resilience to the overall network from a transmission of power from here to the mainland, either through the subsea link to Dunnill or to the south through the Harris link to Skye.
You happy with that answer, Councillor Thompson?
Not entirely, and it's just because possibly I don't fully understand it. Scale and justification of need was mentioned earlier on this morning, and I just wondered, perhaps this would clarify things for me a bit more. How much of this development is required to provide direct benefit for communities within the Western Isles, and how much of this development is for what was mentioned earlier about us being a generating community where that energy is then exported to places elsewhere in the UK. So what I'm really trying to get at is how much is of this development is required for us to maintain our electricity supply, not to provide benefit elsewhere.
I think
Mr. Agnew?
yeah, sorry. Sorry about that. I think what I've just outlined in what I said was that it's required as part of a holistic system design, a holistic HND, holistic network design. So it's designed to facilitate an increase in export capacity for new sources of renewable energy. So the short answer to your question, Councillor, is it wouldn't change the existing supply arrangements, i.e. the Harris to Stornoway overhead line, and if required, the standby diesel generator that we have on the islands already.
Okay, that clears things up a wee bit for me. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you for that, Councillor Thompson. Any other questions from board members? Okay, can I thank the applicant for their presentation? So sticking within the protocol, if there are no further questions from board members, now that we've heard from all parties, I will open the discussion to members of the board before we reach an agreement on the determination of a recommendation to full council in 1 week's time. So with that, do members of the board wish to make any questions or comments? To anyone in the chamber? Councillor Thompson online.
Thanks again. Just a bit of clarification for me, please. There was mention of peatland loss as a result of this development, and I just wanted the officers to come back to me if they could confirm whether the assertion that was made that this is Class 1 peatland and that it cannot be restored, is that a statement of fact that once we lose Class 1 peatland, it cannot be restored?
Mark Ferguson, can you respond to that question?
Yeah, the direct loss of the peatland means there are two grades of peatland here. It's all classed as Class 1 peatland, but there is some that is of lesser quality than the rest on account of part of the site having previously been subject to drainage and cultivation, which means that there is it has already lost some of its quality as peatland. The intention is that it is restored on that there is peatland restoration on a ratio of 1 to 10 from that lost to that restored. It takes a long time to recreate a bog habitat, so it's not that it can't be restored, but it can't be restored in a short period of time.
Okay, so when we're talking about that, the purpose of this, as stated in the presentation just heard, was to meet the energy and climate change objectives. So there must be some balance to be struck, I would have thought, between the loss of that peatland. I think someone earlier had said how important that was as a carbon sink, and balancing that against the benefit of generating clean electricity. And I'm just wondering, is there a way that we can have that quantified?
Mark Ferguson.
I'm sure, not expecting it right this second. I appreciate you might not have that information to hand, but I just wonder, is there a way that we can quantify that potential loss against the potential gain and seeing what the net effect is?
So the environmental impact assessment does carry out a levels assessment. So first of all, there is extensive peat probing to quantify the volume of peat. There is different grades of peat. So there's the peat that is more fibrous at the top and the peat that is more wet at the bottom. And there is a calculation being carried out on carbon loss, or the net effects of that carbon loss. So while there's a direct loss arising from the peat that will be disturbed or moved, the mitigation is the restoration on a ratio of 1 to 10 of peat lost to peatland restored. There is also a commitment by SSE beyond what the statutory requirement is to carry out some further restoration. And maybe SSE themselves would be better placed to provide the detail on that. But there have been 2 pieces of work that were submitted as part of the environmental impact assessment. I don't have it immediately to hand, but that work has been done, and we did commission some external review of that information through consultants, given that we don't have that expertise ourselves.
Okay.
That's covered in the report.
Happy with that, Councillor Thompson?
I'm getting there. There's just one other thing, and again, it's for the officers. The idea earlier was mentioned that we are being involved in these incremental approvals, and that has been raised with me by a number of people, and it is something that concerns me, the fact that we're not making a decision based on the big picture. And I just wondered if there's any comfort that you can give to that, because it is a huge concern that we're not seeing the implications of this in the round. We're just seeing this very narrow one development at a time. And I don't know within planning rules if there is anything that we could do that, but it is an area of real concern that is almost creeping these developments, and we're really not making a properly informed choice because we're not seeing the big picture.
And with that, Mrs. Ferguson?
So maybe let's start with that. Our requirement as planning officials is to assess the development against the adopted development plan. The development plan for the Outer Hebrides is comprised of National Planning Framework 4 and the Outer Hebrides Development Plan of 2018. There is broad support within National Planning Framework 4 for both upgrades to the strategic energy transmission network and for renewable energy. Ministers in adopting National Planning Framework 4 would have been required to consult on National Planning Framework 4 and also to carry out a strategic environmental impact assessment on the contents of that plan. The incorporation of Lewis, or the Western Isles within this network of holistic design, or this network of upgraded transmission, means that there has been like a strategic consideration of it by government at that level. When we assess the application, we've assessed it against that plan. Then the environmental impact assessment has had regard to cumulative effects with developments that are either consented or are reasonably predictable at the point in time that design freeze occurred and the environmental impact assessment was prepared. The projects that were taken into cumulation for the purposes of the environmental impact assessment were the Stornoway Wind Farm, which was consented before this council back in 2021, if my memory serves me right, and consented by Scottish Government in 2022. Phase 2 of the Deepwater Port, which has gone through a scoping exercise by Government. the Arnish Road improvement, dualling of that road, an extension to Marybank Quarry, and the fifth one escapes me at the moment. No. So there are others that are proposed, such as the N4 Spirit and Mar development, other wind farms that have been subject to scoping. And these have been referenced at a very high level because they're not consented. They're not, we don't have the technical information to assess them in cumulation. But the EIA did acknowledge that there would be particularly visual impacts in cumulation with those developments. In particular, the Spirit and Mara substation that would be close to the hub. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's the process that has been gone through, and the recommendation is based on that assessment.
Thank you. And just one more question, Chair, if you'll indulge me.
Of course.
It was mentioned this morning that approval for this would almost predetermine support for future offshore and onshore developments. Could you provide a view on that, please?
Mrs. Ferguson.
All future unconsented developments required to go through like their own environmental impact assessment and come before the council for either a decision or a view. So the consenting landscape is complex. For a wind farm onshore, which exceeds 50 megawatts in generation, it is subject to an application for Section 36 consent under the Electricity Act to the Scottish Government, who consider it under that legislation, and if they are minded to, they will consult the local authority as a consultee along with other consultees. The Energy Consents Unit on behalf of Scottish ministers carry out that assessment, and if they are minded to grant Section 36 consent, have the power to grant a deemed planning permission.
Okay.
So that is the process for new onshore wind farms that are over 50 megawatts. Onshore wind farms that are below 50 megawatts are dealt with through this normal planning process where they apply for planning permission. Offshore wind farms have a more complex consenting process. So the offshore elements are subject to an application for a marine license to the marine renewables consent. For a marine license, the application made to marine licensing renewable section of the Marine Directorate at Scottish Government, who also deal with the Section 36 consent that would normally be dealt with by the Energy Consents Unit. So these two elements of government decision making are dealt with under the one umbrella of the marine licensing. There is no planning permission for the offshore element because planning does not extend beyond mean low water springs for the purposes of renewables. So the decision on the offshore part is a decision for the government, albeit they will consult the council in the same way that they will consult other stakeholders such as Historic Environment Scotland, Scottish Nature Scot, and a whole host of marine interest bodies. So the consenting for the offshore part of it, the council will be a consultee, but is not the decision maker. Separate to the offshore part, there is a requirement for planning permission for some of the onshore elements. So the onshore elements would comprise typically the landfall substation where the power would come ashore from the offshore array, and that would require like a substation close to where the landfall is. There is then either an underground or an overhead transmission from that landfall substation to another substation that would be built close to the HVDC. So both substations would require planning permission. The EIA would assess the project as a whole. The overhead, if there is an overhead line connecting the two substations, then the overhead line is subject to an application to the Scottish Government under Section 36, under Section 37 of the Electricity Act. So it's a very fragmented consenting process. And if it is underground, it is benefits from a deemed planning permission, i.e. it is classed as permitted development subject to it being screened and dealt with an appropriate assessment if required carried out under the Habitats regulations. So I appreciate that that's like a bit of a mixed bag of an answer, but that's the consenting regime. I'm happy to add any clarity to that.
Well, I think my final question then is going back to SSEN. Is this development assuming permission for future onshore and offshore wind developments? Is this development assuming that? Because without assuming that, there would be no need to develop this. Do I understand that correctly?
Can I bring in a representative from SSEN to answer that question?
Hi, Callum Wardrop here, Project Director for the Lewis Hub. I think the answer to that question is essential. We have a licence obligation for these assets, this infrastructure, for a 1.8 gigawatt link, which is built up from a number of different developments. But we are progressing this project due to that licence obligation.
Okay, just for a wee bit of clarity then for me, just so that I understand it in very simple language. If there was no suggestion of any other onshore or offshore wind developments, SSEN wouldn't be putting this proposal in front of the planners at the moment. Is that correct?
Well, I believe there's a number of developments already consented, a number of wind farm developments. I think probably just refer back to my previous answer. We have a licence obligation to design and build and operate these assets at 1.8 gigawatt link.
So the ones that are already consented, do they need this development to allow them to proceed, or is this a development of this size needed just for ones that are not yet consented, to accommodate the ones that are not yet consented?
Mr. Wardrop.
They need our infrastructure to connect to the mainland transmission network, yes.
Okay. Do you wish to make any comment to that, Mrs. Ferguson? No. Are you happy with that, Councillor Thompson?
It's clarified some things for me. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Getting back to this the protocol, any other further questions from members of the board? Councillor Stewart, are you content with the information before you? Councillor George Murray.
I am.
Councillor Robbie Mackenzie. Councillor Susan Thompson online, are you content with the information before you?
No, I'm not.
Councillor McNeill online.
Yes, I am. Thank you.
Therefore, paragraph 3.1 in the report before you asks, do members agree to recommend that the Coria approve the application for planning permission in principle, subject to the conditions set out in Appendix 1 of the report, and the provision of a wear and tear agreement under Section 96 of the Roads Scotland Act 1984, under which the developer will be responsible for the repair of any damage to the local road network attributable to construction-related traffic. Do members agree to those recommendations?
Yes.
Very good. Well, that therefore is the finding of the board. This decision now moves to full council in 1 week's time. Can I bring in the clerk of the board to give you some information on that? Mr. Mackay.
Yes, the recommendations of the planning board will go to the council, which is meeting next week at 4 p.m. in the council chamber.
19th confirmed, 19th of November. 19th. Full council will make a final decision on this. Oh, well, can I thank everyone? It's not the 18th. Mr. Mackay. Mr. Mackay.
No, sorry. My apologies. It'll be at 11 a.m. on the 19th, Wednesday the 19th at 11 a.m.
Okay. Well, with that, can I thank everyone for their attendance and their contributions to this meeting, particularly to members of the public who've, with all your endeavours and your time on this. Can I wish you all a pleasant onward week and a safe journey home tonight.